Part 1. The moon, Cayley 7, hung in the black like a pale pearl, its surface smooth and cold under the light of a distant red sun. Around it, ships from 7 different alien species drifted in careful formation, their hulls shimmering with strange alloys and glowing runes. They had come for peace, or so they claimed. Inside the great dome built for the summit, the air was cool and still. The floor was made of polished crystal that reflected the soft lights above. Alien delegates sat in curved rows, their many eyes fixed on the center platform. Some had skin like bark, others like liquid metal. A few floated above their seats, held aloft by silent anti-grav fields. All of them watched the humans. Captain Daniel Hayes stood alone on that platform. He wore a simple dark uniform with no medals, no rank pins, just a plain collar and straight trousers. His face was calm, but his hands were steady only because he kept them clasped behind his back. He had trained for this moment for years, yet nothing could have prepared him for the weight of so many alien stares. Beside him, almost invisible in the shadows of the delegation's rear bench, sat Commander Lena Ruiz. She looked like any junior aide, neat hair, modest uniform, quiet posture, but beneath her calm surface her mind raced. She had memorized every exit, every blind spot in the dome's security grid, every frequency the Concord used to whisper to their hidden ships. She also carried a small neural implant behind her left ear, pulsing with encrypted data from Earth. The lead envoy of the Galactic Concord, High Speaker Verkal, rose from his seat. He was tall, with 4 arms and a face like carved obsidian. His voice, translated through a hovering orb, sounded smooth and warm. "Captain Hayes," he said, "we welcome you in the spirit of unity. The Concord believes this day marks the end of fear between our peoples." Hayes nodded. "We hope so too, Speaker." His voice was low but clear. He did not smile. He knew better. The talks had begun 3 days earlier. The Concord offered generous terms. Earth could keep its inner colonies, share mining rights in the Helios Belt, and even send observers to the Concord Council. In return, humanity would agree to limit its ship production and submit to joint security patrols. On paper, it sounded fair. Too fair, but Earth's intelligence had been listening. For months, deep space intercepts had shown Concord warships moving toward human borders under the cover of training exercises. Their fleet logistics had shifted. Their diplomatic language had grown softer, more patient, classic signs of deception. The Concord didn't want peace. They wanted to lull humanity into lowering its guard so they could strike without warning. Hayes had read the reports. So had Ruiz, and so had Admiral Paul Dawson, watching from the Sol system with his fleet held in silent readiness. Now, as Verkal spoke again, praising human resilience, calling Earth a young but promising civilization, Hayes noticed something small. The speaker's third eye, usually half-lidded, flicked toward the dome's eastern arch. Just once, a signal. Ruiz saw it too. Her fingers brushed the edge of her datapad, sending a silent alert through her implant. Outside, far beyond the moon's thin atmosphere, human sensor drones hidden inside old cargo containers began recording Concord ship movements with new urgency. The Concord vessels had started shifting. Not much, just slight changes in formation. But to trained eyes, it was obvious. They were preparing to encircle Cayley 7. Reinforcements were coming. And they weren't coming to talk. Hayes took a slow breath. He stepped forward, hands still behind his back. "Speaker Verkal," he said, "your offer is generous. But before we agree to anything, I must ask, why are your warships powering up their forward batteries?" A ripple went through the chamber. Some aliens shifted. Others hissed in their native tongues. Verkal did not flinch. "A precaution, Captain. Space is not always safe. We protect what we value." "Of course," Hayes replied. "So do we." He turned slightly as if to look out the dome's transparent wall at the stars. In truth, he was giving Ruiz the signal. She stood, excused herself with a quiet word to a nearby aide, and slipped through a side door. No one stopped her. To them, she was just another human functionary. But as she walked down the cool corridor, her steps quickened. She reached a maintenance lift and descended to the moon's underground docking bay. There, hidden behind a false wall of storage crates, a small human shuttle waited, engines on standby. Back in the dome, Hayes continued the charade. He asked polite questions about trade routes and cultural exchange. He nodded at the right moments. All the while, his mind was elsewhere. on the fleet waiting in the dark, on the orders buried in Ruiz's implant, on the countdown ticking silently in Earth Command. The Concord thought they understood humans. They saw them as emotional, impulsive, loud. They believed humanity would beg for peace, would jump at any offer that sounded kind. They did not know that humans had spent centuries learning how to smile while sharpening their knives. Outside, the first human railgun platform, disguised as a derelict asteroid, rotated slowly into position. Its targeting array locked onto the nearest Concord dreadnought. On the Resolute, Admiral Dawson watched the feed from Cayley's 7. He sipped his coffee, black and bitter, and waited. Inside the dome, Verkal finished his speech to polite applause from his own kind. He turned to Hayes with what might have been a smile if his species had lips. "Shall we sign the accord tomorrow, Captain?" Hayes met his gaze. "Let's see how the night goes, Speaker." He excused himself soon after, citing fatigue. The aliens murmured among themselves, some amused, others annoyed. They thought he was breaking under pressure. They did not see him slip into the same maintenance lift Ruiz had used. They did not see the shuttle lift off minutes later, vanishing into the moon's shadow, and they certainly did not hear the final message Hayes sent just before comms went dark. Dawn breaks in silence. Far away, in the cold void between stars, over 200 human warships powered up their drives. No alarm sounded, no lights flashed. They moved like ghosts, engines humming at less than 5% output, shields folded tight, weapons charged and ready. The Concord still believed they controlled the timeline. They thought they had hours, maybe days, before humanity would react. They were wrong. Peace talks were over. What came next would not be spoken in words, but written in fire across the sky. Part 2. Deep in the Sol system, far past the orbit of Mars, the UNS Resolute floated in silent darkness. Its hull was scarred from old battles, its weapons ports sealed tight. On the command deck, Admiral Paul Dawson stood with his hands behind his back, watching a star map flicker on the main screen. The map showed Caylus 7 as a tiny blue dot, surrounded by red markers, conquered ships. Dawson was a tall man with gray hair cut short and eyes that rarely blinked. He had spent 30 years in space, most of it fighting small wars humanity never told the public about. He knew the Concord better than most. He knew they smiled with one mouth and plotted with another. For months, Earth spies had sent back reports. The Concord was not interested in peace. They wanted control. They saw humans as dangerous, too fast, too clever. In their eyes, Earth needed to be tamed, gently at first, then by force if needed. Their plan was simple. Pretend to negotiate, wait for Earth to relax its guard, then strike the colonies while the fleet was docked for maintenance. But Earth had not relaxed. Instead, they built. In secret shipyards hidden behind Jupiter's moons, they assembled a new fleet. Not flashy, not loud, just strong, fast, and smart. They called it the 7th Fleet, and Dawson was its heart. Now standing on the Resolute's bridge, he received the signal he had been waiting for. A single pulse coded clean. It came from Caylus 7, from Hayes. The words were short. Dawn breaks in silence. Dawson did not speak. He simply nodded to his comms officer, a young woman named Kara Moss. She tapped her console and a new command spread through the fleet like a whisper. Operation Iron Accord is live. Across the outer rim, human ships stirred. Frigates that had been drifting like dead metal suddenly lit up inside. Engines warmed. Shields hummed to life. Railgun turrets rotated slowly, locking onto pre-programmed targets. None of it showed on normal scans. Human engineers had spent years perfecting stealth drives and signal dampeners. To the Conquered, the space around Earth still looked quiet, empty, safe. But it wasn't. Kara Moss leaned forward in her seat. She was small, with sharp eyes and fingers that moved like lightning over her controls. Her job was simple but vital. When the attack began, she would blind the Conquered. Not with weapons, but with silence. Her ship, the scout vessel Nightjar, carried the most advanced jamming array ever built. It could flood enemy comms with noise, scramble navigation signals, and make their sensors see ghosts. She thought of her brother as she worked. He had died 2 years ago on Titan, caught in a surprise raid by unknown ships. Later, Earth found proof it was the Conquered. They had denied it, of course, but the truth was in the wreckage. Kara had joined the fleet the next day. Now she would make sure no one else died because the Concorde thought humans were too soft to fight back. Back on the Resolute, Dawson gave the final order. All ships execute Phase 1. Far beyond the asteroid belt, hidden inside hollowed-out rocks, human railgun platforms powered up. These were not ships. They were weapons disguised as space junk. Each one held a single barrel, kilometers long, charged with magnetic coils. When fired, they launched tungsten slugs at 1/10 the speed of light. No explosion, no warning, just a hole where a ship used to be. The first shot hit a Concorde dreadnought near Kalis 7. The slug punched through its shield like paper, tore through 3 decks and exited the other side before the crew even knew they were under attack. The ship broke apart seconds later, spilling debris and oxygen into the void. Then came the second, and the third. Alarms finally blared on Concorde bridges, but it was too late. Their long-range sensors were flooded with static, their comms filled with screeching noise. They could not call for help, could not warn their allies, could not even tell which direction the attack was coming from. From the shadows, human fighters emerged, small, fast, and deadly. They swarmed like insects, targeting engine clusters and shield generators. Human tactics were not neat or orderly. They were messy, unpredictable, full of feints and sudden strikes. The Concorde, used to rigid battle lines and formal duels, had no answer. On Kalis 7, Captain Hayes and Commander Ruiz were already aboard their shuttle, racing toward the Resolute's forward command post, a hidden cruiser parked just outside the moon's gravity well. Through the viewport, they watched the Concorde fleet unravel. Ships spun out of control. Others tried to jump to warp only to find their coordinates scrambled by Kara's jamming field. Ruiz checked her datapad. "They're falling back," she said. Hayes nodded. "They thought we'd talk until they were ready. Now they learn we talk while we load our guns." Back in the Sol system, the main body of the 7th Fleet moved out. Cruisers, destroyers, carriers, all painted matte black, all running dark. No lights, no radio chatter, just cold steel and colder purpose. They would not arrive at Kalis 7 for hours, but their presence was already felt. The Concorde's rear guard turned to flee, only to find human stealth corvettes waiting behind them. Admiral Dawson watched it all on his screen. He did not cheer, did not smile. He simply said, "Keep the pressure on." Kara Moss sent a new pulse through the jamming net. This one mimicked a Concorde distress call, but from a fake ship far behind their lines. 3 Concorde cruisers broke formation to investigate. They flew straight into a trap of human minds, laid weeks earlier and left dormant until now. The explosions were silent in the vacuum, but bright enough to light up the dark for a few seconds. On the Resolute, a young ensign turned to Dawson. "Sir, the Concorde envoy is hailing us for call. He's demanding to speak with Captain Hayes." Dawson almost smiled. "Patch him through." The hologram of High Speaker Verkal appeared on the deck, his obsidian face twisted in rage. "This is betrayal," he hissed. "You came for peace?" "No," Dawson said calmly. "We came to stop your war before it started." Verkal opened his mouth to reply, but the signal cut out. Kara had just overloaded his comms array with a feedback loop. He would not be speaking to anyone for a while. Outside, the battle turned into a rout. The Concorde had more ships, heavier armor, but none of it mattered when you could not see your enemy or talk to your allies. Human ships struck, vanished, struck again. They used the moon's gravity to slingshot into blind spots. They fired from behind debris fields. They fought like cornered animals, fast, smart, and without mercy. By the time the first wave of the 7th Fleet arrived, the Concorde presence near Kalis 7 was broken. Only a handful of ships remained, drifting or trying to surrender. Hayes and Ruiz boarded the Resolute just as the last enemy cruiser powered down its weapons. Dawson met them on the bridge. No words were needed. They all knew what came next. The Concorde would not forget this day. Some would call it treachery, others justice. But from now on they would think twice before underestimating humanity. Kara Moss sat at her station, watching the stars. Her brother's name flashed in her mind, not with sadness but with quiet pride. She had done her part, and the human armada, silent no longer, hung in the dark, ready for whatever came next. Part 3. The void around Kalis 7 was no longer quiet. Wreckage from Concorde ships drifted in slow spirals, glinting in the red sun's light. Oxygen clouds from ruptured hulls froze into glittering ice. Bodies in alien armor tumbled end over end, their final moments lost to the silence of space. The battle had lasted less than 6 hours, but it had changed everything. From the bridge of the UNS Resolute, Captain Daniel Hayes watched the aftermath unfold. His face was tired, but his eyes were sharp. He had expected resistance, maybe even a fight, but not this complete collapse. The conquered fleet had shattered like glass. Their rigid formations, their proud banners, their belief in their own superiority. All of it had meant nothing against human speed, secrecy, and surprise. Commander Lena Ruiz stood beside him, arms crossed. She had not slept since leaving the summit dome. Her uniform was wrinkled, her hair loose from its usual bun, but she did not care. She was listening to the chatter from rescue teams. Human shuttles moved through the debris field, pulling survivors from escape pods, both human and alien. Earth's orders were clear: show mercy where possible, but never weakness. Admiral Paul Dawson entered the bridge without a word. He carried a data slate in one hand, its screen glowing with fresh reports. "We lost 42 ships," he said. "Over 600 dead. But we took out 93 conquered vessels. Their command structure in this sector is gone." Hayes nodded. "Verkal?" "Captured," Dawson replied. His escape pod was tagged by one of Kara's drones. "He's in holding now." Ruiz looked up. "He'll demand to speak to the Earth Council." "Let him," Dawson said. "By the time he gets there, the whole galaxy will know what his people planned." And they would. Even now, data teams were pulling files from the wreck of the conquered flagship. Encrypted logs, fleet orders, battle plans, all pointing to a massive strike against Earth's outer colonies scheduled for the next week. The peace talks had been a cover. The conquered had never intended to sign anything. They only wanted time to position their weapons. Kara Moss sat at her station, eyes fixed on her screen. She had just finished decoding a priority message from the captured flagship. Her fingers trembled slightly as she read it aloud. Target list includes Titan, Ganymede, and the Helios mining stations. Estimated civilian casualties, over 2 million. The bridge fell silent. Even Dawson's steady breathing seemed loud. Hayes turned to the main viewport. Out there, among the drifting metal and frozen gas, floated the proof of what could have been. If Earth had waited, if they had trusted, if they had believed the conquered sweet words, but they hadn't. And now, the cost of that choice hung in the air like smoke. Down in the medical bay, human medics worked side by side with alien prisoners who had surrendered. One young medic named Eli Tran bandaged the arm of a four-eyed reptilian soldier who kept flinching at every sound. Eli didn't speak the alien's language, but he smiled gently and offered water. The soldier stared, then slowly took the cup. It was a small thing, but it mattered. Back on the bridge, Dawson gave new orders. "Send word to all colonies. Stand down from alert status, but keep shields hot. And get those sensor buoys repositioned. We don't know if the Concorde has backup fleets nearby." Ruiz tapped her console. "Already done, sir. Nightjar's jamming field is still active in a wide radius. Nothing gets in or out without us knowing." Good, Dawson thought, because the real test was just beginning. News of the battle spread fast. Neutral systems that had ignored Earth for years now sent urgent messages. Some demanded explanations, others offered quiet support. A few, like the insectoid Zenth Collective, sent congratulations. They had suffered under conquered rule for decades. To them, humanity had just done what no one else dared, but not everyone saw it that way. On Earth, protests erupted in cities from New Delhi to Buenos Aires. Crowds gathered outside government buildings, holding signs that read "Not in our name" and "Peace, not war." News anchors called the attack a betrayal of diplomacy. Politicians demanded investigations. One senator even called for Dawson's arrest. Hayes saw the reports on his private screen. He felt a knot in his stomach, but he didn't look away. He knew how it looked. Humans arriving for peace talks, then unleashing a hidden armada. It sounded like treachery, but the truth was buried in the data Kara had pulled from the conquered ships. The plans, the orders, the cold calculations of how many humans they could kill before Earth could respond. The problem was, most people would never see that data. They would only see the images of burning alien ships and hear the cries of grieving families on alien worlds. Dawson walked over to Hayes. "They'll come around," he said quietly. "When they see the full picture, will they?" Hayes asked. "Or will they just remember that we struck first?" "Striking first isn't the same as starting the war," Dawson replied. Sometimes the only way to stop a knife is to grab it before it reaches your throat. Ruiz joined them, holding a fresh data chip. I just got word from Luna Intelligence. 2 conquered member species, the Krell and the Mexari, have broken off from the main alliance. They're calling the attack on Kalis 7 a conquered provocation. They want to talk to us. Dawson raised an eyebrow. Talk? Real talk, Ruiz said. No tricks. They're scared. They think Earth might come for them next. Good, Dawson said. Let them be scared. Fear keeps people honest, but Hayes wasn't so sure. He remembered Verkal's voice in the dome, smooth and calm, promising peace while his ships moved into killing positions. What if the Krell and Mixari were doing the same thing? What if this was just another layer of the trap? He voiced his concern. Dawson listened, then nodded slowly. Then we'll be ready. But we also give them a chance. Because if we don't, we become what they think we are. Karamah stood up from her station. Sir, I've got something. All eyes turned to her. On her screen, a new signal blinked, a tight beam transmission unencrypted coming from deep in the outer rim. It wasn't conquered. It wasn't human. It was something else. Origin? Dawson asked. Unknown, Kara said, but it's repeating one phrase over and over. She played it. A voice, synthetic and cold, spoke in broken English. You have drawn blood. Now others will come. The bridge went still. Hayes looked at Dawson. Dawson looked at the stars. The battle for Kalis 7 was over. But the war for humanity's place in the galaxy had just begun. Part 4. The protests on Earth did not fade. They grew louder. In London, crowds filled Trafalgar Square, holding candles and signs that read, "No more blood for lies." In Rio, students marched through the rain, chanting for peace. Even on Mars Colony 3, workers staged a sit-in at the Central Dome, demanding Earth release the captured Concord envoy. To much of humanity, the attack on Kalis 7 felt like a betrayal, not of aliens, but of their own ideals. Captain Daniel Hayes watched the news feeds from his quarters aboard the Resolute. His face was tired, his uniform still wrinkled from days without rest. He understood the anger. He had believed in diplomacy once too. But belief did not stop bombs. And the Concord's plans, now public, thanks to data released by Earth Command, showed exactly what those bombs would have done. Images of the Concord's target list spread across every network. Titan's nursery domes, Ganymede's water farms, the Helios Belt schools. Millions of names. Millions of lives marked for erasure. Slowly, the tide began to turn. A mother in Nairobi changed her sign from "Stop the War" to "Thank you, 7th Fleet." A teacher in Vancouver showed her class the decoded Concord orders and asked, "What would you have done?" Still, the guilt weighed heavy. Hayes had seen the wreckage up close. He had walked through a Concord escape pod, stepping over bodies that looked almost human, hands clutching photos, helmets cracked open to reveal faces frozen in fear. War was never clean, never fair, and victory always left scars. Admiral Paul Dawson did not watch the news. He did not care for public opinion. He sat in his ready room, reviewing damage reports and fleet readiness stats. The Resolute had taken heavy fire during the final push. 3 engine nacelles were offline. Shield emitters needed full replacement, but they would fly again. They had to. Commander Lena Ruiz spent her time coordinating with the new envoys. The Krell and Mixari had sent representatives to Luna Station, not Earth itself. They wanted to talk, but not too close to human weapons. Ruiz handled every message, every protocol request with cool precision. She knew they were testing Earth, seeing if humanity would gloat or if it would offer a hand. She chose the hand. Kara Moss stayed at her post, but her mind was elsewhere. She had received permission to visit Luna Base, not for duty, for memory. Her brother's name was on the memorial wall there, carved beside thousands of others who had died in silent wars no one talked about. She had never visited before. She told herself she was too busy. But the truth was, she was afraid. Afraid that seeing his name in stone would make it real. Now, with the fleet in repair and the immediate threat gone, she took a shuttle down. Luna Base was quiet. The dome shimmered under Earth's blue glow. Inside, the air smelled of metal and recycled oxygen. Kara walked slowly down the long corridor lined with names. Each one etched in silver, each one a story cut short. She found his name near the end. Corporal Elliot Moss, Titan Outpost Gamma, lost in action. She placed a small, smooth stone beneath it, a tradition she'd read about in old books. No words, just presence. Back on the Resolute, Hayes met with High Speaker Verkal for the first time since the battle. The alien was held in a secure chamber, not a cell. He had food, water, and access to news. He looked older now, his obsidian skin dull, his extra arms folded tightly. "You showed us your teeth," Verkal said, his voice flat. "But teeth do not make a civilization." "No," Hayes replied. "But they keep it alive." Verkal stared at him. "You could have waited," called our bluff. "And lost 2 million lives while we debated?" Hayes shook his head. "We've waited before. We won't again." For the first time, the speaker looked away. Maybe he understood. Maybe he didn't. But the arrogance was gone. Dawson called a full briefing that evening. All senior officers gathered on the bridge. The mood was tense but focused. Kara had returned, her eyes red but steady. Ruiz stood beside Hayes, datapad in hand. "The Concord is broken," Dawson began. "Not destroyed, broken. 3 of their 7 members are now talking to us. The others are silent." "That silence worries me," Ruiz nodded. "We've detected increased ship movement near the Xylos Nebula. Could be regrouping. Could be preparing a counterstrike. Or it could be nothing," Hayes said. "But we can't assume that," Dawson agreed. "We rebuild, we watch, and we prepare. Earth is not asking for war anymore, but we won't beg for peace either." The next week brought changes. Earth Central Command released full archives from the Concord flagship. Every order, every message, every cold calculation. Neutral systems that had doubted humanity now sent formal apologies. Trade routes long blocked by Concord tariffs reopened. Human freighters, once turned away at alien ports, were now welcomed with caution and respect. On Mars, a new school was named after a young medic who died shielding alien prisoners during the battle. On Titan, workers planted the first memorial garden in the outer colonies. And on Luna, Kara Moss returned to her post, quieter but stronger. Hayes stood once more on the Resolute's observation deck, looking out at the stars. The galaxy had not become kinder, but it had become clearer. Aliens would no longer see humans as loud children playing with fire. They would see them as equals, flawed, fierce, and willing to pay the price for survival. Dawson joined him. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, Hayes said, "Do you think they'll come back?" "Not the Concord as it was," Dawson replied. "But others will. Always others. And we'll be ready." Yes. Far below, Earth turned in the dark, blue and fragile, but its children were no longer fragile. They had shown their strength not with boasts, but with action. And in the cold math of the cosmos, that was the only language that mattered. The cost had been high. The path ahead was uncertain. But for the first time in a long time, humanity stood not at the edge of the galaxy, but in the center of it. Part 5. 6 months after the battle at Kalis 7, the dome on the moon had been rebuilt. Its crystal walls now held thin layers of human-made shielding, invisible to the eye but strong enough to stop a plasma bolt. Inside, the air smelled faintly of ozone and polished stone. The seats were the same, but the mood was different. No one whispered in hidden frequencies now. No one hid weapons under their robes. Everyone knew what silence could hide, and what it could cost. Captain Daniel Hayes walked into the chamber alone. He wore a new uniform, still plain, but with a single silver pin on the collar, a symbol of Earth's diplomatic corps. He was no longer just a soldier. He was an ambassador, the first permanent human envoy to the outer systems. His office was a small room just off the main hall, filled with data slates, star charts, and one framed photo of his parents, taken on a beach in Oregon long before the stars called him away. Across the table sat Envoy Trell of the Mixari. She was slender, with skin like pale moss and eyes that blinked sideways. She had replaced Verkal as the lead voice for the reformed Concord, now called the Accord, a smaller group of 5 species, 2 of them human allies. Trell spoke plainly. She did not smile often, but when she did, it was real. "We received your proposal on joint patrols near the Helios belt," she said. Her voice was soft but clear. "The Mixari agree, but we ask one thing." "Name it," Hayes said. "Let our ships carry your comms protocol. The one your scout vessels use, the quiet one." Hayes almost smiled. They wanted Kara Moss's jamming tech, not to use as a weapon but as a shield. A way to detect deception before it struck. It was a sign of trust, or fear, maybe both. "I'll send the specs to your engineers," he said, "but only if your fleet shares real-time sensor logs with ours. No blind zones." Trell nodded. "Fair." Outside in orbit, the UNS Resolute hung like a silent guardian. Repairs were complete. Its hull gleamed under the red sun, scars covered but not forgotten. Admiral Paul Dawson still commanded it, though he spent more time in meetings than in battle now. The fleet had changed too. Human ships no longer hid in shadows. They flew with running lights on, transponders active, weapons powered down unless needed. They had earned the right to be seen. On the bridge, Kara Moss monitored the Accord's comms traffic. She no longer jammed signals. Now she helped build secure channels between species. Her brother's name still lived in her heart, but it no longer burned. It reminded her why clarity mattered, why truth, even when hard, was better than pretty lies. Commander Lena Ruiz worked from a new office on Luna Station. She oversaw the training of human diplomats, men and women who learned alien languages, studied galactic law, and practiced the art of reading silence. She taught them that peace was not the absence of war, but the presence of trust, and trust had to be built, not given. Back on Earth, the protests had ended. In their place came something quieter but deeper: understanding. Schools taught the full story of Kalis 7, not just the attack, but the plans it stopped. Memorials honored both human and alien dead. Children grew up knowing that strength and kindness were not opposites, but partners. One evening, Hayes stood on the observation deck of his new residence on Kalis 7. The moon's surface stretched below, pale and still. Above, stars burned cold and bright. He thought of the day he first walked into the summit dome, heart pounding, hands hidden behind his back. He had been afraid then, not of death but of failure, of letting his people down. Now he felt neither fear nor pride, just responsibility. A message chimed softly on his wristband. It was from Dawson. Just 2 words, all clear. Hayes knew what it meant. A new alien delegation was arriving tomorrow, this one from the Zenth Collective, longtime enemies of the old conquered. They came not to negotiate but to join, to stand with Earth and the Accord against whatever waited in the deeper dark. He looked up at the sky. Somewhere out there, beyond the known systems, the unknown still waited. The signal Kara had intercepted months ago, the cold voice saying others will come, had never been explained. No ships had appeared, no attacks followed. But Hayes knew better than to think it was over. The galaxy was vast, and humanity was no longer hiding in its corner. Inside the dome, workers prepared the chamber for tomorrow's meeting. They placed water carafes, checked translation orbs, and adjusted the lighting. Simple things, human things, but now aliens did them too. They had learned that peace was not made in grand speeches but in small acts of care. Hayes turned from the window and walked back inside. His steps were calm. His mind was clear. He had a report to finish, a message to send to Earth, and a new envoy to greet at dawn. In orbit, the Resolute's lights glowed steady against the black. On Luna, Ruiz reviewed language drills with a young diplomat. On the bridge of a scout ship near the edge of known space, Kara Moss watched the stars and listened. Not for threats, but for chances. Humanity had not won the galaxy, but it had earned its place in it. Not through noise, not through fear, but through the quiet courage to act when others only talked. And as the red sun dipped below Kalis 7's horizon, casting long shadows across the crystal dome, the stars above burned a little brighter, not with fire, but with hope.